Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone that's here, and thank you for being here. I know that we have a lot of students, and we also have members of our state representatives here, as well as members of the Board of Supervisors and City Council. I don't know if we have elected officials from other areas as well, but thank you also for being present. This afternoon, we have the pleasure of having with us an individual who is certainly committed to making sure that Virginia continues to lead the way. He's focused on areas like education, transportation, making sure to promote the beautiful areas of the Commonwealth, as well as our healthcare center. But what impresses me most is his continued interest in service and his continued interest in following his mission as to what is his responsibility to others. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming an individual, a man that I'm proud to have as our governor, His Excellency, Governor Tim Kaine.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, folks. Thank you all very much. Please, have a seat. Well, you laughed when he said His Excellency, so I guess I'm not that impressive do you know, I think for the Virginia governor is the only governor where that is the actual title. It's not the Honorable, it's His Excellency. Probably because of the old English law connection. But the way I describe it is, in Virginia they call you Your Excellency, but they only give you one term. So they say nice things about you, but they don't want you around for very long. So that's the kind of trade-off. It's really nice to be here in Martinsville and to be with folks from Martinsville and the surrounding communities. And I want to thank Mayor Reynolds for his generous introduction and his friendship. I'm really happy to be joined here, not just by Kimmel, but by two great members of the legislature, Roscoe Reynolds and Ward Armstrong, both of whom I work very closely with and consider dear friends. And it's just good to be here with you. I'm here because I decided when the legislature adjourned that I would do 10 town hall meetings around the state to talk about the legislative session, what was accomplished, some things we're still working on, some things that we didn't get done, and then open it up to answer questions. And this is the 8th of the 10 meetings that I've done. And I have 2 more in Northern Virginia, one next week and one the following. But it's just a chance to just dialogue. And so what I'm going to do is I'll probably spend 25 or 30 minutes just kind of walking through important issues from the session. And then I'll open it up and I'll answer questions about either those issues or about anything else you want to ask me about, if I can. I don't know the answer to every question, but I'm going to do my best. But let me also point out to you a couple of things. There was a little intro that you heard. I do have staff members here from my Constituent Services Office, and I'm going to see where will the setup be in the back. If you have a question that you do not want to ask in public, or if I don't get to you, because after I'll probably take an hour's worth of questions, and if there's still questions, my voice will probably be shot. I may not take them all. But there's staff here who can answer your questions, and they're glad to and get you answers. Second, in this part of the room are great folks from the State Department of the Treasury, unclaimed property. And you were probably also given a little brief about that. 1 in 7 Virginians, the state is holding property for you. You may not know it. So if you get in line there, some of you are going to walk out of here with a check in the mail to you. And I learned this as governor when I was elected, before I was inaugurated. I went to the Treasury office and they said, "Hey, Governor, do you have unclaimed property?" I said, "I don't even know what that means." They ran my, whatever, Social Security number and found out the state owed me $700. This was right before Christmas, and it came in handy. So, and the mayor of Wytheville last night was one of the people who found that he was owed. Now he was only owed $3.36, but in the 7 town hall meetings that we've done so far, we've given out $23,000 of unclaimed property that people who attended were entitled to. So some of you will have a check in the mail to you if you go check that at the end of the evening. One other thing, I'm real happy to be here in this high school in particular, and I had a great chance to visit with a number of the students, juniors and seniors here, who were real gluttons for punishment because they came to this even though it's spring break. But Martinsville High School just received an award or a grant really. We're trying to promote high schools to do more and more AP courses. And Martinsville High School is one of the 14 high schools statewide that received a grant over the course of 5 years to increase AP course offerings because many great things are happening at this high school, and that's why Martinsville was chosen. So I'm very glad to be here with the students, faculty, other from the school, and just say congratulations. All right, let me jump in. I'm going to start here and talk about a recent recognition that Virginia received. And there's a couple of points about this recognition that will segue as we talk about the legislative session. Governing Magazine is kind of a Bible for those of us in state and local government. And every 3 years, Governing Magazine does a survey of states, and they give states a grade in terms of performance. In 2005, Virginia received the top grade in the nation, an A-, tied with Utah. 3 years later, well, actually not quite 3 years, last May, they started to prepare for the 2008 version. Intensive questionnaires, every state had to submit a lot of information, a lot of back and forth dialogue. They visit each of the 50 states with a very intense site visit to explore, again, the quality of state government. And we're very happy that in March 3, just about 3 weeks ago, they came out again with Virginia as an A- grade at the top performing state in the United States, which I view as a very solid. We can always do better. We always got to watch to do better, but a very good indication of the fact that in terms of performance, the state government does a pretty good job. A couple of things. Thank you. Thank you, TC. And I'm going to ask you to applaud again in a minute about something in particular, but let me just go through. What they do is they give you the state a grade in 4 categories. We did very well in information. Information is the way do you use data to help you perform better. So we have something called Virginia Performs, a website that lists the criteria, the targets that every state agency is trying to meet. Important quality of life measures, infant mortality, third grade reading scores, unemployment rate. You can look at it statewide, you can look at it for your own city or county, you can look at what our targets are, whether we're meeting our targets or not. And so in that area of information, we received an A, along with a couple other states, really trying to give information to citizens and use it to make good decisions. Money, budgeting, revenue forecasting, how well do you manage money? We received an A-. We're one of the top states in the country, tied with a couple of others in money. That's an important one. My favorite is people. We were the only state in America that had an A for people. So state employees, hardworking state employees, who often don't get a shout out and a lot of congratulations for the good work that they do. And not just state employees, but local government employees as well. That there is a real sense of public service in our state employee corps. And that's the applause line, because so many great state employees don't get rounds of applause, and I imagine there might even be some here in this room who are state employees. How about a round of applause for state employees? Our weak spot, some of these we actually increased. This grade went up from 3 years ago, people, and information grade went up, but the infrastructure grade was an A- 3 years ago, and it slipped to a B+, largely because of transportation infrastructure issues. And there's some other infrastructure issues that we've got to get a handle on, or that's going to continue to slip. And it slips in ways that will hurt us economically, and in all parts of the state, infrastructure being weak will hurt us. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. One other bit of information that I thought was interesting, and if you want to check this out, all you have to do is just go Governing Magazine, and you can pull this up and read the descriptions of all the states, which I've done because I'm going to try to steal good ideas, basically. But there's some real good information in here. But every state has this little information summary, and this is an interesting fact. Our average per capita income in Virginia is 5th in the nation. 50 years ago, we would have been 35th to 40th. 15 or 20 years ago, we would have been 20th to 30th. But now we're number 5 in the nation in per capita income. But state spending per capita is 36th in the nation. So we are and this is a state average, but on average, income tends to be high and state spending tends to be low. In fact, there's only one state that has a wider spread between high income and low spending, and that's the state of Colorado. And so sometimes you'll hear folks say, well, the state, too many taxes. And we can always argue about taxes, but compared to other states, especially states with high income, we have actually very low state spending. All right, let me jump over to the legislative session. We just had a 60-day session. It actually went 65 days. We extended by 5 days. Some people have said, well, that isn't a good thing that the legislature had to extend. I'm a little philosophical about this. We have a 2-year budget that's a $78 billion budget, 12th largest state in the United States. But we have one of the shortest legislative sessions. So sometimes as the state gets bigger and the budget gets larger, we've got to take a few extra days to get it right. I don't view that as that big a deal. I propose a number of initiatives this year in the legislature, and I want to walk through first some that passed, Then I'm going to tell you a couple that did not pass. And then I'm going to tell you 2 that are still up in the air that we're still working on. Then I'll open it up and take questions. So let me just start marching through. Campaigns and elections. We have a lot in Virginia of active duty servicemen and women, guardsmen and women, and reservists who are deployed overseas. It can be very difficult for them to vote. To send in time to get the absentee ballot and then get the absentee ballot back and then send it in time can be a hassle for folks who are serving our country but serving overseas. So as of because of a bill that the legislature supported me on, folks overseas will be able to, if they're Virginia residents, can vote electronically. Now, we may one day all be doing that, but right now it's just limited to those overseas. But I think that will enable our servicemen and women to be able to participate in elections. A good government measure supported in a bipartisan way, Democrats, Republicans, House, Senate. Another campaign and election item that's important is the way we regulate campaigns in Virginia. One way we regulate is we require folks who run for legislative offices or statewide offices to report everybody who gives them money. And that report goes on a website, so anybody can always research to see, okay, who's supporting your campaign. There was an end run that had developed, though, that sometimes a person would give money to an organization and say, give it to candidate X, and the money would be given that way, and they wouldn't report who was the individual who actually gave the money. Instead, it would just be organization Y gave the money. And people were getting an end run around truly disclosing who were supporting their campaigns. We changed that this year, requiring that the actual donor of the dollars that gets to a candidate has to be disclosed. Consumer protections. This is an important area, and I'm looking at Roscoe here. Roscoe is involved in a key area here. You know, sometimes you'll read a story in the newspaper about like a government employee who'll take a computer home with a lot of personal data on it. It will get stolen or lost, and so data that might be personal or private ends up being inadvertently disclosed. We've had a policy in state government where when that happens, we notify people if your data has been compromised, we notify you so that you can take steps, for example, to protect your credit rating, make sure people aren't using the data to do you financial harm, etc. Roscoe was a patron of a bill this year on breach notification that extended that same provision to when companies inadvertently disclose data about you. So now in Virginia, whether it's a company or government agency, under most circumstances, if data that is important data inadvertently gets out, you have to be notified either by a company or government. Second, you also have the ability now under Virginia law to stop anybody from getting a credit report issued about you. In identity theft cases, what often happens is somebody will either get your social security number or a credit card number. They won't use your credit card. They will use your data to take out another credit card where the bill's sent to an address that you'll never see, and then they'll run up a lot of charges that you don't even know about. But the credit cards only get issued after people first search your credit, get a credit report issued. So if you can freeze credit reports from issuing, you can stop anybody from opening up fake credit in your name. So we worked out a bill this year that enables you for a $10 fee to freeze any credit reports from being issued. That will also protect you from security breaches. One other consumer protection item that was, well, 2 others actually, they're pretty important. First, foreclosures. You've seen the news about home foreclosures increasing dramatically in our nation. In Virginia, they've doubled from last year. We're still below the national average. But we put a bill in place to basically, if you have a subprime loan, which have been often the loans that have led to the most foreclosures, the lender has to give you some additional advance notice before they start foreclosure proceedings. They also have to give you the names and identities of mortgage counselors that you can deal with to try to save your home and save your loan. And then finally, in consumer protection, one that I see a couple of stickers in the audience, and we've had a number of people who've been really interested in the issue of payday lending. Really quickly, the payday lending industry was sort of created in Virginia in 2002. Most banks will not loan money to people of less than about $2,000 because the paperwork to get the loan is so complicated that banks usually don't do it. So in 2002, an industry came to Virginia and said, if you will adjust the cap on interest rates, which had been 36% annually, we would like to open up lending facilities that will loan small amounts of money, but we would want to have a larger interest charge. Legislature supported that bill. Since that time, we've been trying to wrestle with the notion that a lot of people get into cycles of debt as a result. They get into debts that tend to kind of accelerate and skyrocket because of high interest rates. Now, many people use payday lenders who don't get into cycles of debt, but there have been a significant problem. So this year, as another consumer protection item, the legislature passed a very significant reform of payday lending to limit, no one can have more than one loan at a time. After you've taken out 5 loans in a period of time, you get locked out of the system for a while, all to try to protect people from getting deeply into cycles of debt. Sexual and domestic violence. Every year we try to deal with public safety issues, obviously, to help serve crime victims better. And this year we did a number of things to help crime victims of crimes of sexual and domestic violence. And most of what we did was changing some provisions of Virginia law that were kind of surprising, frankly, to many of us. We didn't really realize these, but let me tell you a couple of them. And again, Roscoe was involved as a patron in a couple of these bills. I was surprised to find out that in many jurisdictions of Virginia, a woman complaining about a crime of sexual violence was asked to take a polygraph test before there would be an investigation of the crime. Now, we don't polygraph other crime victims, but there was sort of a practice in many jurisdictions with crimes of sexual or domestic violence to require a polygraph before an investigation was done. We got rid of that provision. Roscoe was the patron of that in the Senate. That was a very important thing. It was also common in some jurisdictions for women reporting crimes of sexual violence to be asked to pay for the physical evidence kit, which costs about $800, that is used by hospitals to help investigate crimes of sexual violence. If you want to file a complaint, you got to pay for this kit. That was ridiculous. We don't charge other crime victims the costs of their investigation. Roscoe also patroned that measure, and that requirement was eliminated. So we will pay for the investigation of crimes of sexual violence, just like other crimes. There was another provision of Virginia law that was very unusual. If somebody was charged with statutory rape of a minor, it was a defense to the charge if the defendant married the victim. And this is an old provision of Virginia law, and what would happen is sometimes a defendant would prevail upon a young and vulnerable person, well, okay, let's get married, and then they would do that, and then the crime would have to be dismissed. Well, there's no excuse to rape or justification to rape. The fact that that was in law, that was a relic of a day way gone by, and so we got rid of that provision as well. So as a result, we think that these 3 changes will help victims of these very challenging crimes be treated in a more humane way by the criminal justice system. Protecting the environment. 2 areas important. Water quality first. In the past 2 years, the legislature and I have worked together to put $700 million into funds for helping sewage treatment plants and cleanup of the outpouring of pollution from factories. We call that point source pollution into rivers in the Chesapeake Bay. And that was really good. The next frontier is working with farmers on agricultural runoff and trying to invest money and match dollars with farmers and the Farm Bureau so that farmers can institute practices to reduce runoff into streams near their farms. The legislature put about $20 million in the budget this year to work together with farmers on that. Second, on the environment, I have a goal as governor to preserve open space. I believe if you preserve open space, you preserve the natural beauty of Virginia, but you also help water quality and air quality. And we're doing some good things in open space preservation, but I propose to issue bonds to enable us to purchase more open space. The legislature, the 2 houses are still trying to settle on the amount. It'll be somewhere between $30 and $50 million. They're still negotiating. But we will be able to use those to advance open space preservation, which is good for the environment. Probably the heart of the session this year, in my personal opinion, was what the legislature did to respond to the shootings at Virginia Tech. Obviously, nearly a year ago, a horrible tragedy, but the community has hung together so very well. But I had a panel of experts that I put together right after the shooting at Tech that looked at everything that happened, what went right, but also especially what went wrong, and most importantly, what we could do better. A lot of recommendations were made. The heart of the recommendations were improvements to the mental health system. That Virginia does not provide community-based mental health services like we should. We have institutions, but not everybody needs to be institutionalized. An awful lot of mental health needs really need to be taken care of in the communities. And so this year, again, the legislature, working in a bipartisan way on mental health reform, did a couple of very important things. Increased funding significantly for the community service boards, which are the regional entities that coordinate mental health care in the regions of Virginia. So funding increase was important. Second, equally important, change some legal standards. We had a very tough legal standard in Virginia that a court had to really make an elevated finding to order somebody to receive mental health care. And we were out of step with other states in that. And you have to have the right balance between trying to protect people's individual rights, but also trying to protect public safety. So we changed the standard that can lead to a commitment order to make it more equivalent to what the standard is in other states. And finally, in the mental health area, we changed some of the management of the mental health system. Gave more power to the state to write performance agreements with the community service boards so that we could standardize quality so that the quality of care wouldn't vary wildly from region to region, but we could hopefully have high standards across the Commonwealth. That was a very important thing that will have long-lasting impact in Virginia that the legislature really should get a lot of credit for. One other item on the Virginia Tech shootings, we did some other things, campus security plans, information sharing with people believe folks might be a threat to themselves or others, clarifying how that information can get shared with health officials or law enforcement officials. And we also did a fix of a problem with the gun laws in Virginia. It is illegal for somebody who's mentally ill and been adjudicated dangerous to purchase a gun, but those adjudications were supposed to be entered into the criminal record system that could be checked by a licensed gun dealer before selling to someone. In Sung Wee Cho's case at Virginia Tech, he had been adjudicated mentally ill and dangerous. That order was never entered into the database. So the gun dealer that sold him the gun searched his record, but it never disclosed that there had been a finding of mental illness. I fixed that by an administrative order last April, but the legislature made it permanent in statute this year, and that will help. And that database is searched nationally, so that it would help if somebody moved to another state as well. Public safety, I've mentioned a couple of public safety items. Let me mention two more real quick. We now have a very vigorous move over law in Virginia. The law enforcement guys here know what I'm talking about. Probably a lot of citizens do too, but we often have accidents where law enforcement people are injured as they serve because they're on the side of the road writing a ticket or working with a motorist and somebody runs into them. Very serious injury of a state trooper, Chris Chapman, in the Smith County area on the 3rd of February because he was working with somebody on the side of the road and a drunk driver ran into him. Now, we put in, now he is improving, he's doing a lot better, but like many states, we put in place a move over law where if you see a law enforcement officer on the side of the road, you have to move as far away from that law enforcement vehicle as you safely can to give them room to do their job. And that will be an important matter for road safety. And then second, in public safety, a little bit of a improvement, I think, to an existing law. Y'all remember when Governor Allen was governor, put in place the no parole law. But there were a lot of people who were in prison before that who were still eligible for parole. It was only people sentenced after that law went into place who are not eligible. We've started to have a problem. Here is the problem. The folks who were eligible for parole before, if they're out on parole, and then they commit what's called a technical violation. They don't break any law, but maybe they lose their job and don't tell their parole officer, or they move without telling their parole officer. The way the original no parole law was written, there was sort of an interpretation of it that if somebody committed a technical violation, they had to be pulled back into prison and serve the rest of their time, even if they didn't break any new law. And that's not the best thing. Over 1,000 of our admissions into state prisons last year were people who committed technical violations but did not commit any new crimes. So we changed that law to give judges the ability to exercise discretion. Well, is this a serious violation or a minor one? And if it's a minor one, we shouldn't be filling up prisons with people who are not, who are really, leading law-abiding lives and not creating new legal violations. Child services. This is an area that is personally very important to me. My wife was a juvenile court judge. Issues dealing with services to youngsters are important. In this Virginia Tech shooting, a lot of the mental health monies are mental health monies to serve children and adolescents. But in child services, we found that Virginia, which is used to doing some things well, we perform pretty well. We've been given awards for financial management, best state for business in America, good educational outcomes. But here's an area where we were really one of the worst in the nation, and it's the way we treat kids in foster care in Virginia. You know that some children, and especially teenagers, this will happen, will get removed from their homes, not because they did something wrong, but because their parents abuse and neglect them. And that happens in all states. There's a group of children who are in this foster care system who have been removed from their homes because the adults in their lives have failed them. In most states, those children are in foster homes or adoptive homes, overwhelmingly. A few will be in group homes or institutions, but most will be treated in families, foster homes or adoptive homes. In Virginia, though, a much higher percentage of these kids get put into group homes and institutions rather than in foster and adoptive homes. We do a very poor job of that. And you know, that's a problem for a couple of reasons. It's a problem because if you can, a kid will always be more successful being in a family. I mean, we ought to be trying to have kids in family settings if it's at all possible. And so during those years when a kid's a teenager, to be around a family is going to be a very important thing. But secondly, when you age out of foster care at age 18 or 19, if you're in a group home or an institution, suddenly you're not part of the system anymore and you're released. And so where do you go for Christmas? And who calls you on your birthday? And if you're in college and you have a summer vacation, or you're in the military and you have a furlough, where do you go? A lot of these youngsters become sort of free agents without permanent adult connections that can help them be successful through the rest of their life. So the legislature worked in some very novel ways to reform the system this year, to put money into the recruitment of foster and adoptive parents. The rate we pay foster parents in Virginia was 40% less than the national average. Now, nobody's a foster parent to make money, but there are foster parents who would like to do it who can't do it if they can't figure out a way to feed the extra mouth at the table. So the legislature has put us on a path to get to near the national average in foster care reimbursement, and we've done some other things that we think will significantly increase the percentage of our kids who are actually served in home settings rather than in institutions. That would be real positive. Education. Two things real quick. One, there's an unfinished business item on education I'll get to in a minute, but let me talk about three: pre-K, K-12, and higher education. I ran for governor and have continued to push the notion that we should give more children the opportunity to have a high-quality year of pre-kindergarten, especially at-risk kids at age 4. And that if we can help more kids have that high-quality pre-K year, they'll be much more successful later in school and later in life. Martinsville has been a fantastic site for study of this. Virginia started a preschool initiative back in 1997 that serves some 4-year-olds. Most jurisdictions can't serve all the needy 4-year-olds they have, and Martinsville has been one. And pretty much all jurisdictions are in the same place. But what Martinsville has done that other communities haven't is Martinsville kind of tracked the kids they were able to serve and the kids who were eligible but couldn't be served, and looked at how they performed, on the 3rd grade reading exam and then later. And what Martinsville and other communities have found is that the kids who get served with this high quality year pre-K are less likely to repeat grades, they're more likely to read on grade level in the 3rd grade, and they're more likely to be successful down the road. The legislature supported us this year in education to increase the pre-K program about $22 million, which will enable us to serve 2,000 or 3,000 more students statewide than we were serving before. And that's a very significant expansion that will help a lot of kids be more successful in their educational careers. K-12 education, the legislature worked very hard to make sure that the schools of Virginia, 134 cities and counties, have the budgetary resources they need. And so the increase in budget for K-12 education, it's important we're here at a high school, was $1.2 billion over the previous 2-year budget. We do 2-year budgets. So about $600 million a year increase in support for K-12 education over the previous 2-year budget. And that was tough because the revenues were tight this year. But it was a reflection of the fact that education is the most important priority in state government. In higher ed, I put in money to increase funding for the New College Institute. Not all that money stayed in, but some of it did. And Barry, I'm going to continue to be with your legislators a big fan for NCI and continuing to expand it. Higher ed access increasingly is one of the most powerful tools we have in economic development, our higher ed system. And so having higher ed access to Martinsville, having higher ed access to all communities is critical. We're going to keep supporting that. We've put in money for additional higher ed financial aid, additional research at the higher ed level, and some additional money for higher ed operations, although not a huge amount because the tight budget this year made it a little difficult to do that. Workforce. This is an important one. I want to talk about, before I talk about a legislative initiative, let me talk about an anxiety that I know this community has faced and others have too. and that deals with the Virginia Employment Commission offices. In Virginia, the VEC offices are funded, like they are in most states, by federal dollars. Employers in Virginia pay a tax to the federal government, goes to Washington, and then Washington writes Virginia a check, and we use that check to run our VEC system. Washington is using a very bizarre allocation formula for money. What that means is for every dollar of tax that a Virginia employer pays, we only get back about 27 cents. They say, well, Virginia doesn't have a high unemployment rate, so we don't need to give you so much as we give other states. We actually, some of our VEC offices are really efficient. They do a lot of work with a lot of internet connection and things like that. So they say, you guys are efficient. You don't need as much money as some other states. They kind of penalize us for being successful, but we're really one of the kind of on the short end of the stick in the 50 states in terms of not getting back the money that we put in. And this problem has gotten worse as we're in federal deficits and the monies are shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. The federal government has a trust fund for these unemployment dollars totaling over $30 billion, but they don't want to send those monies back to the state. They say they need to save it for a rainy day or something. So what ends up happening is we're trying to manage a VEC system statewide off this pool of federal dollars that's just been shrinking, shrinking, and shrinking. In December, because of reduced federal revenues, I had to work with my VEC to do layoffs, which I didn't want to do, but we had to lay off over 200 people in VEC offices around the state. The head of my VEC commissioner, D. Esser, said, Governor, I wish this was the end of it, but I got to tell you, within 6 months or so, we're going to have to be looking at closures of offices as well. So we have done a very intense analysis of if we close offices, where should they close. There was a piece of legislation that was introduced by a legislator, Danny Marcia from Danville this year, that said, and I'm taking a couple extra minutes on this because I know it's something that is a source of concern, but there's a piece of legislation that said the only factor in closure should be unemployment rate. If you have to close offices, you should close them in areas with low unemployment rates first. And we did not support that bill, and I'll tell you why. Unemployment rate is the most important factor, but it's not the only factor, because sometimes you'd have an office with, in a high unemployment rate, and then you'd have another one which would be slightly lower, but this office was 10 miles from another office, and this office was 50 miles from another office. So you have to, or this office served a few people, but the one with the slightly lower rate served a whole lot of people. So you have to balance various factors. Nevertheless, we've worked through this over the course of the last few months. We are going to have to do some closures. We'll probably announce within 10 days that we're going to close 2 offices and relocate 2 offices, close relocations, but none of those closures are going to be in Martinsville, the Martinsville or Danville area. They're going to be elsewhere. So I know that's been because the unemployment rate is one of the factors, really the most important factor to consider, but there are others as well. So you'll see some news probably 10 days to 2 weeks out, but it will not be news about the offices in Martinsville or Danville. One other thing we did in workforce this year is workforce was done in state government in 20 plus state agencies and 4 different cabinet secretariats, which means it's kind of hard to manage. So the legislature gave me a directive, streamline this system. And we put in a bill this year to put management of the workforce system into the community college. So the head of the community college system will now be the chancellor of the community college system and the state workforce system. That does not mean that every workforce program will be on a community college campus, although probably the community colleges do more workforce training than anybody else. There will still be workforce training programs in K-12, in the Department of Rehabilitation Services, in departments of social services, but it will all be administered and managed through the chancellor of the community college system so that we can streamline and know that we're using our dollars the most effective way. And that's appropriate because the community college system really is our pioneer, kind of our frontline champion in workforce areas. All right, I'm going to get to my last one and then say a couple more words and open it up. This is my least favorite. This is why I put this one at the bottom. Abuser fees. Last year, the legislature passed, and I amended and signed a transportation bill that tried to raise money both for regional needs and statewide needs, and had a couple of components that have proven to be unworkable. The first is abuser fees. The notion was make really bad drivers who commit either DUIs or egregious reckless driving offenses pay significant civil penalties in order to hold on to their license, and then use those penalty dollars for maintenance. When that went into effect in July 1, for a variety of reasons, the citizens said, you got to be kidding, we don't like this. And so the legislature, at my request, and we all agreed, we repealed the abuser fees that year. That leaves a hole in the maintenance fund. The second aspect of the bill last year was 2 regional plans for Northern Virginia and Hampton roads that within the last month the Supreme Court of Virginia has said you can't do it that way. So we're basically kind of back to where we were a year ago on transportation. And that is the first unfinished item I wanted to talk to you about. I'm going to bring the legislature back in a special session on transportation sometime before the end of the spring to wrestle with the state's transportation needs. And I'm going to kind of go back to where I was when I started as governor in 2006. Not regional packages. This is a statewide problem, and there's got to be a statewide solution, and it's got to touch upon all communities and not just be a solution for a couple of regions of the state. And so I am working with the legislative leadership. Roscoe has been assigned as kind of one of the key folks in the Senate on this, and Ward, as a leader in the House, is playing a key role in this one as well. And I'm dealing with Republican leadership in both the House and Senate as well to talk and dialogue and find the best possible resolution. That doesn't mean that the legislature is just going to vote yes automatically because I say so. But we're in dialogue. I'm going to call a special session. I'm going to introduce a bill, and I'm going to ask people, look, this is an important issue. This is where we're weak right now, and it's getting worse. And if we want to be a strong state and have strong economic development, we've got to be better. So we'll do that sometime before the end of the spring. The second unfinished item is an education issue. I proposed this year a construction program at our community colleges and colleges of about $1.5 billion of construction over 6 years. Significant expansions of our ability to serve more students, to train workforce, and to expand research opportunities in our universities. Both houses of the legislature have agreed we need to do this, and they've generally agreed with the projects, but there's some disputes about how the bonds will be issued and when. So we're working together with the 2 houses to try to take their 2 versions and accommodate them and find a compromise. I'm pretty confident we'll be able to do that by late April when we are next together. I told you I would also say, if I was going to say we did a lot of good things, in the interest of full disclosure, I got to say things I proposed that didn't pass. So there were 4 things I proposed that I cared a lot about that did not pass. I had a proposal for something called a homestead exemption, which giving local government targeted tools to provide tax relief to homeowners. That passed in the House and not in the Senate. I proposed a different way of drawing legislative districts. I generally think that the legislative districts should be drawn not by incumbent legislators, though I love them, but they should be drawn by non-legislators and non-party officials. The Senate passed my proposal, the House did not. I proposed a bill to ban smoking in restaurants. I was surprised to learn that if you work in a restaurant, there's a 50% greater chance of dying of lung cancer than the average American. And that we regulate the health of restaurants in a pretty intense way. Hair nets in the kitchen, washing hands, etc. So why would we regulate those things and not regulate such a significant elevation in lung cancer death risk? That passed in the Senate and not in the House. And then I proposed a 4th bill dealing with gun shows, so that at a commercial gun show, somebody would have to check the background record of anybody making a purchase to make sure that no felon, no domestic abuser under a protective order, or nobody who's mentally ill and dangerous would be able to go in a gun show and walk out with a gun. I didn't get that passed in either house. So I feel like I should at least say the things that I tried and kind of whiffed on, as long as I'm telling you that there's some things I tried and succeeded on, and those 4 didn't pass and may come up in